Well, good afternoon, everyone. If you'll stand with me, I want to welcome you to the Thursday, February 25th meeting of your Irving Las Colinas Rotary Club. Our anniversary in the city was February 16th, 1937. So we've begun our 84th year of service to this community. Our invocation today is going to be led by Pastor Shane Webb, our pledge by Dr. Jose Parra. Our song will be led by Neil and Sandra, and Bobby Haas will lead us in introducing our visiting Rotarians and guests. Pastor Shane.
Let's lift our spirits together in prayer. Loving God, we thank you for this day and for the warmer weather. Lord, we pray for all those who struggled last week in the freezing temperatures, who sustained damage, who were dealing with the issues of the cold, who were struggling to find food. And Lord, we thank you that there was help, that there were neighbors that were willing to step up and take care of each other. And Mr. Rogers reminds us that anytime there is a tragedy, we should look to the helpers. And there were many helpers involved in helping people get water, helping people warm up, helping people get food and things that they needed. And Lord, we are thankful for the helpers in this community, and we ask that this club would continue to be helpers for our community. Lord, bless us as we continue to serve our community. Bless the food that's before us and the presentation and the conversations that we will share. And we ask this in your holy and loving name. Amen.
Thank you, Shane. Dr. Parra, lead us in the pledge.
Yes, please face the flag and join me in pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, Neil and Sandra are going to lead us in singing Deep in the Heart of Texas. All right. Y'all did good. Reminds me of baseball. I'm used to singing Deep in the Heart of Texas, Take Me Out the Ball Game, and getting Dan Henry to give us the weather. Is that like the seventh inning, the eighth inning you give us the weather there? I think it is the seventh inning that comes up. So we're ready to play ball here in a few weeks. Well, Bobby Haas is going to introduce our visiting Rotarians and guests. Do we have a couple there, Bobby? Hi, Aaron. Hi, Josh. Let's welcome all of our visiting Rotarians and guests. Before I go to our speaker, I've got a couple of quick announcements. Nicole Menzel is here representing Superintendent Magda Hernandez. Quick update on the school district. You can come use the microphone if you like. That way the people online can hear you. Actually, you can stand right here and they could see you, all right? You didn't know I was going to bring you all the way up.
So that's all right.
Use this one.
Oh. Hi, everybody. Just wanted to share something very exciting with you. The district will be hosting for the very first time a State of the District event. So similar to State of the City, but State of the District, it will be virtual this year. It will be on Thursday, May the 13th at 9 a.m. It will be live streamed out to our business and community leaders. It will be free to watch. The theme is the power of game changers, and we'll be focused on telling on our story and how we're changing the game in early education and access to college and careers. So just wanted to put that out there. We'll be sharing more information, but super, super excited about this event, and we can't wait to share our story with you all. So thank you. Thursday, May 13th, 9 a.m.
We'll get that in the bulletin that goes out to everybody so you can save that date. Thank you, Nicole. Be very excited to have that. Bill LaBar has an announcement about flags and an update on Dr. O. So Bill, come share with us what's happening.
I saw Dr. Oberlin last Friday. He's still declining, but he was alert and knew me and able to have conversation. And so that was good. I came back we were in Alabama and missed the storm. That blessed me. I came back early just because Dr. O wanted to see me. Now, we're going to build flags a week from this Saturday, which is March the 6th, 9 o'clock. So we'll work an hour. We need to build about 50 flags. Now, you need to save your wine corks, okay? Now, this is what the Presbyterian pastor went through last week during the ice and snow. No. And it was, it was sacramental wine, but so save your wine corks and bring them. And then the 6th, we will meet for an hour from 9 to 10 and try to build 50 flags. Okay, thank you.
Good, Bill. Thank you for that. If any of you else have the wine corks, you can bring those up. We're going to put them in the top of the flag poles to keep the rain from getting in and rusting out the poles. Any other announcements that I've overlooked? Well, I was really excited. A few weeks ago, I got an email from Stephanie, I believe your sister, letting us know that Dan Henry had written a new book and was going to be available to speak to communities. I gave her several dates. She picked this one. Now, she picked it right after we had a weather event. So I think that's pretty insightful on her part. But we emailed out Dan's bio to you if you check your emails weekly. But Dan's been in this community for 10 years now? 18 years, all right. But been in broadcasting since 1990. Has had a tremendous amount of extreme and severe weather experience, which he covers in his book, Menacing Skies, Texas Weather and the Stories of Survival. I want to give him as much time as possible. Will you welcome Dan Henry?
Thank you, Robert.
Folks online here, so they'll hear you either way.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for coming out today. I do want to start out, usually my publicist and attorney, Stephanie Holen, is here with me. She couldn't make it today, but she deserves a tremendous amount of credit for helping me out. This is a full-time job. In addition to my full-time job, just getting out and talking to groups and talking about the book. And she's been a real asset, and I really couldn't have done it, without her. And if you need a good attorney, come up to me afterwards. We all do at some point, and I'll give you her information. But boy, what a couple of weeks here in North Texas. Before I talk about my book, I feel like I have to at least address what we've all endured. And I think that's really the best word to describe what we've been through. We've had to endure, almost 2 weeks of some of the harshest, brutal cold that we have ever felt here in North Texas. -2 degrees. That was just over a week ago. Coldest temperature in over 70 years. We had some areas in North Texas that were as low as -6, -7. And then on top of that, 2 extended periods of over 100 consecutive hours below freezing. Had it not been for 2 hours on Saturday, the 13th, the day before Valentine's Day, we would have spent well over 200 hours consecutively below freezing. So in my mind, at least, this is probably the second worst extended cold snap. Believe it or not, there was one worse than this back in 1983, December, 12 days in a row from the 18th through the 30th. We were below freezing, 295 consecutive hours. Now, we didn't get as low as we did this go around, down to -2. So second coldest temperature ever in North Texas history. And hopefully we won't be below 0 for many decades to come. But obviously, I'm not going to get into the politics, with ERCOT. That's not my business. It's not my arena. I forecast the weather. And I will say this was a very well forecasted event. We knew it was coming days in advance. And there were signs well over a week in advance. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is something called the polar vortex. And you guys have probably heard that phrase mentioned. And the best way for me to describe that is consider a spinning top. When a top is spinning very fast, it's stable. It's going to stay basically in one spot. It's going to rotate around that axis perfectly. When the top slows down, though, what happens? It wobbles, and it becomes more unstable. And that's kind of a good way to describe the polar vortex. When it's stable and spinning fast, it keeps all that bitterly cold Arctic air corralled generally north of the Arctic Circle around the North Pole. But there are at least a couple or a few instances during the course of a winter when it becomes more unstable. And when it does, you can have it split and these lobes of very cold air literally break off and head southward. And we saw that. And it went south through Canada into the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes. And then literally we got one reinforcing shot of Arctic air after another. And then once there was snow cover literally on the ground from Canada all the way down through Texas, as we got additional blasts of Arctic air, they didn't modify at all. Typically, those air masses will modify or become a little weaker as they head south. Well, they didn't. And so as we headed into Sunday and Monday and Tuesday, the temperatures kept getting colder and colder and colder. And boy, we had 3 consecutive mornings with low temperatures in the single digits. Obviously, we are still suffering the after effects with plumbing and burst pipes. Tragically, we had the big accident in Fort Worth. We had a number of cases where people were struggling to stay warm using alternate sources of heat. And there were carbon monoxide incidents. There were incidents on ponds and lakes where people fell in and fortunately were rescued. But it's just been an unbelievable stretch of weather. And yet here we are, a week later, and we were 72 yesterday. We were 81 the day before that. And we've probably got about 4 or 5 days of thunderstorms now in the forecast with the potential of severe weather, because severe weather season is literally just around the corner. And that's how quickly things change here. That's how dynamic our weather is in North Texas. And quite frankly, that's what keeps my job interested. And that's why I love forecasting the weather. I don't like to see destruction. I certainly don't like to see anybody get hurt, but it's extremely challenging. And my job literally changes week to week as our weather changes week to week. So there's never a dull moment. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to get through. When I sat down to write Menacing Skies a couple of years ago, I knew I wanted to talk about the hows and whys of our weather. But I also wanted to include stories in this book, personal survivor accounts, people like you and me that never ever thought that they would face the worst that Mother Nature has to dish out. And they lived to tell about it. And that was literally the most rewarding aspect of writing this book, was getting a chance to interview these people. and have them tell me their stories. And I feel privileged and blessed to be able to share their stories in this book. One of the accounts that I'll show you here later on is somebody that survived Delta Flight 191 that crashed at DFW Airport back in 1985 due to a wind shear accident. Incredible story, incredible story. There's history in here as well. If you're a history buff, I talk about D-Day. I talk about the crucial role that meteorologists played in forecasting the weather for that particular day and why it got postponed 24 hours. I talk about many outbreaks here in North Texas. QR codes. Here's another opportunity for me to give kudos to Stephanie Holen, my publicist and attorney. She when we were, I was bouncing ideas back and forth with her, and she says, you ought to put some QR codes in there. We've become very familiar with them now due to COVID. It's those QR codes that you scan to get the menu from the restaurant. Well, there are QR codes throughout my book that will give you links to videos of tornadoes that have hit here in North Texas. The Fort Worth tornado, for instance, in 2000. There's a video from the Greenland ice sheet. There were literally researchers that were sitting on this sheet of ice for well over a week, studying it, watching it. Then one day, literally before their eyes, camera rolling, they capture an iceberg the size, 3 times the size of Manhattan, breaking apart. It's called a glacier calving event. I've got a link to that video in the book. It is truly mesmerizing to watch that. So these QR codes kind of are an added dimension that kind of immerse you in what I'm talking about and really bring it to life. I start out the book after my introduction looking at the day after Christmas tornado outbreak, terrible tornado outbreak. How many of you were here during that outbreak? Probably a good portion. Another very well forecast event, but talk about bad timing. Day after Christmas, if there's a time of the year when we are not dialed in, when we're not plugged in, when we're thinking about other things, thinking about family and Christmas and the holidays, it's that time of the year. And so I think despite the fact that we tried our best to get the word out about what was going to be happening, it did still catch a lot of people off guard, including tragically nearly a dozen people that drove right into that tornado as it was crossing over I-30 and the George Bush Turnpike there in the Garland Rowlett area. Many of those vehicles were thrown off the top of the highway. It was a war zone. I talked to 2 survivors of that tornado, actually 4. But 2 were in a pickup truck that got thrown by that tornado, and they lived to survive, lived to tell about it. Their story is in that book. We here in North Texas are kind of towards the southern end of Tornado Alley, where all the ingredients come together to produce severe weather. It's unlike any other area in the entire world where you get this unique set of atmospheric ingredients that come together so frequently. And that's why we see so much severe weather. And one of the things that I talk about in my book as well, this is probably the most technical part of the book, is when I talk about tornado formation. And there's interviews too in this book. It's my expertise, it's my experience. But I also interview a number of some of the foremost experts in the country. And one of them is an expert in tornado genesis. And I think he gives a really insightful explanation about how tornadoes form, how they develop. I talk about what role the cap plays. You may have heard us talk about the cap. You can think about the cap as if you had a pot of water on the stove and you turn on the heat and it's heating up 170, 180, 190 degrees. If it hits 205, nothing happens. It's just hot water. It doesn't boil. Okay. The second, though, you hit 212, the water starts to boil. That's kind of what's going on in the atmosphere on a spring day here in North Texas. We're heating up that atmosphere. Thermals, air is rising because it's so buoyant. But above that rising air is a cap, kind of like a lid on a pot, that's preventing that air from rising further. And as long as that cap stays overhead, you won't see anything happen. You might see some lazy cumulus clouds develop, but you won't see any supercells, you won't see any tornadoes. But if that cap bursts, there can be a tremendous release of built up energy. And then within a matter of minutes, you can literally see these coliform clouds form right before your eyes, and severe weather within minutes sometimes. I talk about that in the book. I kind of take you inside our Fox 4 studios. That's me on the right. Evan Andrews, my morning colleague, on the left there. We're looking at a live chaser feed. I like to describe our storm coverage during those crazy severe weather days as controlled chaos. You can see that wire on my back. I've got an earpiece in, so usually there's a producer or three that's talking in my ear, telling me, okay, we've got this chaser's up now with his feed. We've got this reporter stationed over here. Dan, can you go to this tower camera? We see something pretty interesting there taking place, all the while that we're also looking at the radar and tracking storms. We've got another eye on the National Weather Service chat session because information is flowing in literally second by second from emergency managers and chasers all over North Texas with what they're seeing and what they're reporting. And then we're also watching social media because let's face it, in this day and age, everybody's a reporter. If you have a phone in your hand, you have an opportunity to capture pictures and video, and they share them with us. And many times that is extremely helpful. It's that ground truth that we get. We can tell you a storm looks bad on radar, but we can't tell you 100% certain with certainty that it's producing a tornado. But if somebody has a camera and they're rolling, that's the verified truth that we need to help with us getting the message out about, boy, this is a dangerous storm, confirmed tornado. Folks, we've got video of it. Boom, here it is right here. And that really hits home with viewers when they see that and they know, okay, this storm means business. I need to take shelter right now. There's the D-Day invasion. Took place June 6th, as we all know, but it was supposed to launch June 5th. 3 teams of meteorologists were advising General Eisenhower and the other generals about the weather. There were 2 storms that were threatening the Normandy beaches in the days leading up to that. The first storm was hitting on the 4th and 5th, and the weather was terrible. And when you have to launch an invasion that involves thousands and thousands of troops and land paratroopers in precise locations and launch boats, you can't do it when there's driving rain and 35 and 40 mile an hour winds. And this is a notoriously stormy area of the world. Well, these 3 teams of meteorologists, 2 British, 1 American, were at odds because they had differences of opinion. They had differences in the way they forecast. And recall, this is 1944. This is before the age of satellite. This is before the age of radar. This is before computer models. And so they didn't have all this sophisticated equipment at their fingertips that we do today. And yet they were still able to issue pretty accurate forecasts. And they got together, and 2 out of the 3 teams decided that they needed to postpone this launch by 24 hours. If you can think about how intimidating that must have been to march in to General Eisenhower's office and tell him that he needed to postpone his invasion 24 hours. But he listened to them, and there was a narrow window on the 6th for that successful launch. And then the next storm hit literally on the 7th. And it really did catch the Germans off guard because they were not expecting an invasion given the weather conditions that were going on. And so there were, as fortified as it was not as fortified as it would have been had the weather not been doing what it was. 1957 Dallas tornado. This was a very well documented tornado that hit on an early April afternoon around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was on the ground for about 10 miles. There is a link in here with one of these QR codes. I did a 50-year look back at this back in 2007, and I got real lucky. Sometimes good stories need luck. And somebody was watching my retrospective story, and they call me up and they say, you know, Dan, we live out here in East Texas. Her name's Vicki Lester. And me and my husband, we have this film that's been sitting in our attic for 50 years. All we know is that there's a label on it that says 1957 Dallas tornado. Well, there's very, very little film in existence still today of this tornado, and most of it belongs to my competitor, Channel 8, and I can't use it. So I said, yeah, really? I said, so you're telling me that this canister of film's been sitting in a Texas attic for the last 50 years, and you want to know if it's still good? I'm like, it's probably not. I'm sorry to say. She's like, but I said, tell you what, we've got a film buff here in the station. He collects all this old equipment. Let me see if he can get an old projector. So I got in touch with him. He got a projector. I invited Vicki and her husband to the station. They brought their film with them. We threaded the film into this, and we didn't know what we thought. We were just going to see black, or really, really grainy, footage that you couldn't detect. We popped that thing on, and it was like it was shot yesterday. It was unreal, beautiful. It was preserved as if it was shot yesterday. And it documented the entire, he was like Johnny on the spot, her father, her deceased father now. But he held the camera so still. I said, was he a professional video? No, we didn't even know he owned a camera. Like, are you kidding me? It was beautiful. And he, just steady as can be, shot the whole thing. And so I did a follow-up story about this. Well, that follow-up story is in the book. If you scan the QR code, it talks about this whole process that we went through and this discovery. I even talked to a Dallas historian who was floored by this. So that's another kind of cool aspect. That's the Delta 191 crash at DFW Airport, 1985. That little boy is who I interviewed. He's not a little boy, obviously, today. He's in his 40s. His father, unfortunately, was killed in that crash, as were about 130 other people. If you know anything about tennis, Rod Laver is a Hall of Famer tennis player. That's Rod Laver's cousin. Ian, the older gentleman, and that's Richard. And Richard was on board with his father. They were sitting in row 34. When this aircraft entered the thunderstorm on that August afternoon, it hit an incredibly strong downburst. We now know about the dangers of wind shear. There are wind shear alert systems that have been installed at every major airport in the country, and this is one of the major reasons why. This was the final straw that really convinced Congress and the FAA enough's enough, because we had been losing about, on average, one aircraft every year in the couple of decades leading up to this crash. And they said enough's enough. And so they did some thorough investigation and research, and the crux of that was we now have these wind shear alert systems installed. But they entered that downburst, and I talk about it. And when that aircraft went down, it went down in the field north of Highway 114, which is now all built up. But back then it wasn't. And it's rambling at close to 200 miles an hour, bumping up and down on that field. When it reaches Highway 114, the right wing clips 3 light standards. The engine catches on fire. The aircraft is still intact. It's when the left wing clips those 2 big water tanks, white water tanks that are still there to this day, that's when the aircraft burst into a fireball, and from row 33 to the front of the aircraft basically just explodes and disintegrates. The rear portion of that aircraft, that's from row 34 back. That's all that pretty much was intact. He was in row 34. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He was ejected from the aircraft through the fireball, landed in the field, and almost drowned in the field because the wing had clipped those water tanks and thousands of gallons of water started spilling out in the field. If it weren't for a passerby, a motorist who had stopped and literally plucked him, he was face first, unconscious in the muddy field with 85 to 90 mile an hour winds still raging because a thunderstorm was still going on, lightning, thunder, hail. It was an unbelievable storm. I talk about from that moment forward what he did, how he survived, and his survival story is amazing. What he did with his life after that is just, and I remember when I gave my manuscript to my publisher, they said, Dan, you've just gone on a little bit too much with this story here. I think this is a web, like, no, this is an awesome story. This needs to be in the book. It really does. And so I think readers will really, really appreciate his story. And the profound impact. And that's the thing that I discovered with these accidents is PTSD, we tend to associate with veterans for good reason. But people that go through these storms suffer PTSD as well. Their life from that day forward changes forever. And his did. And the next 2 decades of his life he was a vagabond. He had no purpose. He was suffering tremendously. I talk about that, and I also talk about, again, what he did with his life is nothing short of amazing. Severe weather research, that is a Doppler on wheels. To go up close to the storm and to peer into those storms now, we do these major research experiments, and we've learned a tremendous amount about what makes these storms tick, why some spawn tornadoes, and why others don't. There's also a very sobering story in there about the El Reno, Oklahoma tornado back in 2013 that claimed the lives of 4 storm chasers and how that happened. And these were veteran, savvy chasers that had been on hundreds and hundreds of tornado chases. They got a little bit too close to a storm that was 2.5 miles wide with near 300 mile an hour winds, with inflow winds that were flowing into the storm at 100 miles an hour. So that vehicles that were trying to escape were facing 100 mile an hour headwind, if you can imagine that. His car, very small car, he took a smaller car that day, loaded with 3 people, 3 adults, and several hundred pounds of equipment. That's what he did. He launched what were called tornado probes in the path of the tornado to try to capture data. And they could not escape. And so they got caught up in that. And I talk about that. Talk about lightning, hailstorms, downburst winds. We get it all here in North Texas. Climate change, that's obviously a topic that is very controversial. This is the final chapter in the book, but this chapter I spent more time on probably than any other in the book. I talk about all the natural variability, the natural factors like El Nino and La Nina, our natural cycles called the Milankovic Cycles, that over the course of many thousands of years, our orbit changes just a little bit. The axis right now it's at 23.5, but did you know that it literally varies from about 21.5 to 24 through the course of thousands of years? And all this has an impact on our climate. But there's some very, very undeniable evidence that things are escalating much more quickly than can be explained by natural phenomenon like that. That's a photo of the Muir Glacier in Alaska, 1941 compared to 2004. It's retreated over 30 miles. Notice the vegetation too on the hillside as well. It's amazing. And the glacier calving event is in that chapter as well. So I've got some copies for sale here as well. If you'd like to purchase, I've got actually it's 30 for the hardback and 25 for the paperback. But those that are watching online, I think that Robert was going to help arrange a sale that way. But I'm going to open it up for questions from you all here. If you're at home, maybe online and want to share, I don't know if you can share a question, and then I'll try to answer that as well. So anybody want to start here in the room? Okay. Good question. He asked what does break that cap that we talk about so often in the springtime? There's a few different things. You can heat up the atmosphere even more. So if we heat it up, you know, to let's say upper 80s, 90 degrees on a spring day, that sometimes can be enough to break through the cap. Sometimes it takes a cold front to give that extra boost, that extra lift to break through the cap, or disturbance in the upper atmosphere that can come along and generate lift to break through that cap. So there's a number of different things. We so many times here in North Texas, we are razor thin, and we're on the verge of seeing just an unbelievable severe weather day, and the cap holds. And yet you go a little farther north of here, especially north of the Red River into southern Oklahoma, and they bust through the cap, and there are tornadoes left and right. There's a reason why central Oklahoma is the most tornado prone place on the planet. They average, literally, Oklahoma County averages one every single year. There's no other county in the United States or in the world that has that type of frequency of tornadoes. And one of the other reasons why is central Oklahoma tends to get a lot of the early season events that we get. But here in North Texas, once we typically reach late May, early June, we tend to shut things down. They tend to go a few weeks at least beyond that. And so they catch not only the early season, but some of the later season events. And so their season tends to be several weeks longer. And that's why they tend to also get so many more events in central Oklahoma.
What got you into meteorology?
So I kind of talk about that in my introduction in the book, but you know, there were a couple of things. I grew up actually in California, and San Francisco Bay Area. Didn't really get too much snow there in the 10 years I lived there. One day though, we woke up to about 3 inches of snow on the ground, and I just went nuts. It was just, you know, as a little kid in California, being able to see and touch snow for the very first time in your own yard, it was magical. But we moved then from California to Delaware in 1979. I was 12 years old at the time. And within a couple of weeks, we saw this major coastal storm. Now, we were visiting. One of the reasons we moved back east was to be closer to my grandparents. And so we were at my grandfather's house, and I watched all the stations that night because I knew there was snow in the forecast, and they were all saying 1 to 3 inches. So I went to bed, my sister and I slept. Dad comes in the room, knocks on the door, and he's got this grin on his face, this sheepish grin. And he's like, so I said, Dad, did we get snow? He's like, yeah, we got some snow. So I said, oh, great. He's like, you might want to look out the window though. So I peel back the curtains and I look out the window. There was 2 feet on the ground, and it was still coming down. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world does that happen? School was out for an entire week. And I thought, man, I mean, the weather can truly, I mean, be so unpredictable. And how does a storm like this just, you know, and now I know it's just a matter of miles, especially those nor'easters. I mean, 50 miles farther east off the coast, and all that heavy snow is out over the water. 50 miles farther west, and all that heavy snow is, and predicting that track can sometimes be very, very daunting and challenging. Certainly back in 1979, it was when our computer models were still pretty much in their infancy, and were very, very primitive compared to today's stuff. But that's kind of what captured my attention, that particular storm, President's Day blizzard, 1979.
Is there anything new coming in technology that excites you about weather forecasting?
You know, there's always something new coming around. Our computer models, you know, every, you know, few years tend to get tweaked a little bit. And, you know, for many, many years, the limitations has been computing power. You know, we think we've got all this computing power, and we do, but still, in order to crunch the billions and billions and billions of calculations that you have to make to produce our computer models, takes a supercomputer the size of a city bus. That's how big it is. And so, you know, we're basically at the mercy of computing technology. I mean, we can plug in more and more and more data, but it would take hours and hours to crunch it. And by that time, it's not a forecast anymore. We're past that time. So that's one limitation that we have, but still computer models are getting better and better. They're getting more high resolution. The data that we're feeding into, you've heard the saying, garbage in, garbage out. You know, for many years, our data, you know, collecting wasn't really up to snuff. And so we were kind of putting in questionable data and spitting out, you know, questionable output. The data is getting better now. We have buoys in the ocean that we didn't have many years ago that are collecting, because that was kind of the information void. We had plenty of data over land, but 70% of the earth is covered by water. And so the weather doesn't stop. You know, it's a lot of it's developing out over the oceans. And so we need to know what's going on there. We need to collect data. And so we have buoys now. We have aircraft when they fly. I mean, your commercial flights now are gathering aircraft data and sending it in. So the data collecting is much better. Doppler radar technology has gotten much better in the last 5-6 years. Every single site across the country, the National Weather Service radars were all upgraded to what's called dual polarimetric radar. So instead of shooting out one beam, we're shooting out two beams simultaneously. And the difference in phase between those two waves of energy can tell us a lot of things about precipitation type. Is that rain that we're looking at? Is it hail? Is it sleet? Is it snow? Or does it look nothing like what we call hydrometeors? It doesn't look like, you know, a raindrop or ice. Oh, what that is it's shingles and it's tree branches. That's tornado debris. And now with dual pole radar, we can actually show debris balls from tornadoes, especially big tornadoes that loft debris in the air. The 2019 Dallas tornado was one that we were able to show the debris ball, and debris was literally being lofted 20,000 feet into the air by that tornado. It had a tremendous amount of lifting power, and that's why many homes lost their roofs. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Exciting and very interesting.
Yeah.
Will you be able to stay around for a few minutes?
Absolutely.
And more questions or sign
Absolutely.
books?
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. What a fascinating presentation. I've got my copy of the book up here. I encourage each of you to get a copy. Not sure how many you brought today, but hopefully
I've got enough. Yeah. Okay.
we'll put them all to good use. So, Dan, why don't we have you queue up at that table with your books at it, and then make sure you stop by and visit Dan on the way out. Or if you have a story, or if you got a piece of footage in your attic that's been sitting there for 50 years, Dan may want to talk to you about it. So let's stand together, and we're going to close our meeting with our four-way test. So our new member, Ryan Maney. Ryan, we're glad you're back with us today. Lead us into the four-way test, if you would. Thank you again for everyone being here. Thanks again to our speaker. Just so excited that you were able to come out and spend the day with us. Great presentation, exciting book. Everybody online, If you haven't sent in your order for your book, send that in so we can get your copy and come by and say hi to Dan. We are adjourned.